Nu är det viktigt här, Omar Makram, att du säger ditt namn varje gång du pratar. Så att folk inte tror att jag är du och du är jag. För att vissa har ju svårt att höra skillnad på rösterna hos män som kommer från samma del av världen.
All the faces.
All the faces.
Okay, so I will start by saying my full name now. Omar Makram Mohammed Ibrahim Omar Khalifa Mohammed Hamdi Mansour Faid Abu Lil Dib.
Och jag vill att du gör det varje gång du öppnar munnen. Du är den sista medlemmen ur Sista Måltiden som är med i Hur kan vi?
Är det så?
Ja.
Right, yeah.
Sen är det full circle jerk.
Right. There we go.
Ja. Och jag menar, vi har ju hängt en del och vi har ju också haft en liten sån här kriskommunikations sms-tråd post Paolo Storm, där vi har mest egentligen så här tagit hand om Hanif.
Actually, yes. I think even the group chat that we had for Sista Måltiden was krishantering åt Hanif Aziz.
Jag älskar Hanif. Hanif är världens finaste, världens största hjärta. Men jag skulle önska att Hanif fick mer ro och mer sömn. Och bara så här få så här. Jag unnar Hanif mer arrogans. Mer så här, fuck it. Energi.
But the question is, would he still be Hanif then?
Menar du att han hade blivit Hanif Bali?
No, but I mean like if he gets more peace, more sleep and so on, maybe his personality will change.
Sant.
Who knows?
Sant. Du har precis varit med i en annan podd nu.
Ja, Gott snack. Ja, det var roligt faktiskt. Was so many people who are sharing mics and stuff. Sometimes I feel that there's something that to me is very liberating now, that I really try as much as possible to speak without any filters.
Okay.
I think more and more, I've realized this for a while ago, but more and more I'm realizing that freedom to me is the most precious thing ever. It's more precious than anything. It's more precious than safety, more precious than security. This is something that, speaking of Sista Måltiden, for example, is something that I don't want to compromise with at all. I've taken this decision and it has not been easy, but since I came to Sweden and left Egypt for freedom, it would be very strange if I suddenly, okay, that freedom thing is maybe a little bit overrated.
Jag menar, du har ju, som Nassim Taleb brukar jag säga, du har ju verkligen visat skin in the game när det kommer till ditt resonemang om frihet. Jag menar, du har ju mer eller mindre satt ditt liv på spel och offrat hela din trygghet och dig själv för det du tror på. Och för mig är det är ju
what I stopped believing in.
ja, precis. Vad du slutade tro på, men kanske också, jag menar, alltid när du lämnar någonting så är du för någonting som du tror mer på.
Absolut.
Och för mig är det är ju för mig bland det mest hedersvärda som finns. Och jag kan också känna igen det väldigt mycket från hur jag har vuxit upp med mina föräldrar. De gjorde ju också en liknande resa som du har gjort. Och jag tror att det kan vara värdefullt att du vi ska komma till det också, att du berättar för jag skulle vilja höra hela din resa.
Right.
För vi har ju hängt mycket, men vi har ju mest pratat om.
It's a puzzle.
jag har sett pusselbitarna, men jag är liksom fortfarande så här, jag vill få hela berättelsen Omar till mig. Men först är jag så här nyfiken på när du säger frihet. För vi pratade också om så här, sanning är viktigt, frihet är viktigt. Vad menar du när du säger frihet?
I think to have the freedom to speak your mind, because there is like two sides to this. There are countries that are more like dictatorships, like Egypt, for example, where you actually the state oppresses you and you cannot say what's on your mind. You cannot live a religion and so on. So there's a more direct, how to say, like abolition of freedom. But here in Sweden, I had perhaps when I came here more of a, some people could say, naive dream. I thought that I had come to the land of the free, to the land of freedom. And this is how I have been acting all the time. To speak my mind totally, to be myself without any kind of censorship. And this more and more has been a bit point of friction with Sista Måltid and the pod, that I've gotten comments from people saying, no, but Omar, these things, you can maybe say them in private. It's okay to say them in private, but not in public. And to me, that was really provocative. It means that there is something within me that I'm ashamed of, and I have to hide from other people. And I'm like, no, I have nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah, I can, use dark humor, and I can like talk in an explicit language.
Humor of color.
That too. And so on without being ashamed. But, well, it has showed that it does not come cost-free even here, which, again, maybe I was naive and thought it was cost-free here in Sweden.
I mean, jag tror inte att det är frihet om det inte kostar. Nej, förlåt. Jag tror inte att det är sanning om det inte kostar.
Aha, okej. Intressant.
Så Sverige är ett land där du har möjligheten och större möjligheter att uttrycka dig fritt än många andra länder i världen. Du riskerar inte att utsättas för statligt våld på samma sätt. Eller kanske på samma sätt som i Iran eller i Egypten. Men det betyder inte att det är kostnadsfritt eller riskfritt. Så jag tror att du behöver förstå svensk kultur för att förstå på vilket sätt du riskerar att bli bestraffad om du bryter mot normen.
Jag håller med. And this I didn't understand before.
Right.
And I only understood now. And the thing is also, to me, something that I have observed in myself, and something that I'm a bit curious about, where does this really come from? I realized that I have a tendency to rebel against social norms. So that I did in Egypt, for example, with religion. But that, in a way, I noticed that if we talk about blasphemy, it seems that I have started blaspheming here in Sweden as well. Talking about things that are considered a bit taboo. If we talk about questions like, prostitution, gender equality, and my critique of certain grains of feminism, for example. Psychedelics, that's also another thing. So there's like a lot of things that are considered taboos, and it's a way they provoke some kind of, to me, a religious fervor, a reaction that is, to me, it seems very religious. Even when I thought that Sweden is a very irreligious country before. So I was a bit surprised, talking about like the whole Paolo thing. I was a bit surprised by the reactions. When we had Paolo Roberto on Sista Måltiden, Hur kan vi? And the many of the reactions, they really reminded me of the reactions of some people, some Muslims, when I criticized Islam. And this was like a an eye-opening moment for me as well. And it made me start to wonder, if I was right to think that Sweden is a very religious country.
I mean, so growing up, my dad told me a lot of stories about neighbors disappearing because they hadn't distanced themselves from other neighbors who happened to be Marxists or Jews. I mean, there was a bunch of Persian Jews who fled the country during the 80s. And there was this kind of ratting out culture. So you were supposed to rat out your neighbors if they had anti-regime thoughts or they said something that didn't align with Muslim values. So you were supposed to tell on your neighbors and on your family and on your relatives. And if you didn't, they could jail you for that or torture you or even kill you for that. So there was this distancing culture or ratting out culture or telling on your neighbors culture, which my dad has. He told me a bunch of stories when I was growing up, and I was like, yeah, that's really weird, and that's things that happened in Iran. But there's some tendencies. I'm not saying it's the same because it's not, but the tendencies, the phenomenon.
There are similar tendencies. I remember actually when Paulo Roberto thing happened, like when he bought sex and then the thing came out into the light, I've gotten messages from people who actually, mostly women, who asked me, why are you so silent about the Paulo thing? How come you have not condemned him publicly? And I was like, but I don't have a need to do that. And me,
also, I'm not the Pope.
Yeah, exactly. But I think like this is like, again, this kind of religious behavior, I would say, that you would have to condemn the sinful person and ta avstånd från honom. But I will talk about something that, again, when I remember when I came here to Sweden, after a while there was the same-sex marriage was legalized in the US, and for some reason this have started a very big debate in Egypt. I don't know why. People really got offended, and like they were people
because of the legislation in the US.
Yes,
they were like offended of that
very much, and they were like, "Oh, what's the next step? Are they going to legalize pedophilia and things like that?" And I got provoked, so I put a picture of El Kaaba. That's in Mecca, you know,
the
that
big
place
rock.
where they go for the pilgrimage. It's a very holy site for Muslims. So I put a picture on Facebook of El Kaaba with the rainbow painted on it.
While you were in Egypt?
No.
Okay.
Här i Sverige. I would not have survived.
That's even harsh for being an Omar.
So, and the reactions that I got from like relatives and friends in Egypt and so on, people like, you know, cursing me, blocking me. My family also got like really provoked. And it was very similar to how people reacted when we had the picture with Paulo Roberto. Very similar reactions. A reaction of like, I would say, religious offense or religious disgust, in a way. So that has been interesting to observe.
I'm so deeply curious about those kinds of reactions. Like, why do you care what other people believe in, who they fuck, what they do, what kind of drugs they want to put in their body? Yeah. Why do you care so much? I mean, people in Egypt are annoyed and provoked because gay people have the right to get married in the States.
Yeah.
It's like, why? Why do you care?
I think I've been thinking about that a lot. And maybe because after breaking up with religion, one can say, I went into some kind of ultra-atheist, like hyper-rationalist kind of mentality.
The Dawkins coma.
Could be. And I really started to, and now when I think about it, actually it was a similar pattern of behavior, because first I was a very believing Muslim, and, you know, I thought that there is one truth, and this is the truth, and it has been revealed by God, and everything else is wrong, and everyone else who does not follow it are just like, you know, lost people or blasphemers or whatever. And I had kind of like similar, I fell into the same pattern after I left Islam. So I was like, you know, there is just rationality, and this is where like just like human rights and like liberalism, and this is like, how come anyone could think something different, and so on. And while I still subscribe to a lot of these values myself, I started to have more understanding for people's, the religious instinct, I would say, people's tendency and society's tendency to basically form a religion and gather around that religion, and feeling really threatened when someone goes against the values of this religion. So that would explain, for example, people in Egypt, why are they getting upset? Because to them, it's like, you know, the world's largest power is basically doing, like, they are saying that our religion is wrong. We know that Allah said that homosexuality is wrong, and that the throne of, this is something I used to believe as well, the throne of Allah shakes when two men have sex because of God's anger at this act. So for them, this is just like very, very offensive, regardless of where it is.
I mean, every time I hear that, like in some of the Christian scriptures and the Christian values is like, you shouldn't masturbate, you shouldn't touch yourself.
It's part of my childhood trauma, by the way.
I know. I heard you tell that story. Or you shouldn't. Two men should not lay together, or you shouldn't do this, or you should do that. I mean, that image of God, I don't care if it's in Christianity or in Islam or any other religion. To me, it's like, if God is God, then God does not give a fuck. I mean, if God is God, like, you know,
yes,
the whole concept of God, the all-seeing, the all-knowing, the all-present,
the all-benevolent as well. Like,
I mean, it's God. God doesn't care if you jerk off. No. God doesn't care if you put who you fuck, or if you, I mean, God, when you die, if there's an afterlife and you like meet God, or you come to that like front desk or the reception, and it's like there's a list of your sins and your virtues. I mean, I bet if there's a list, like someone is reading your list, I bet it's a prank. It's like trolling. It's like, well, no, I'm just kidding. Get in here. We don't care. It's heaven. We don't care.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, that idea of God is just a projection of us, because it's very limited. Right. God is not limited. We are. So that is just a projection of us. Because if God is God, then it's like it's cool.
Yeah,
it's like you go to heaven and it's fine.
Yeah, it's actually, I think what after my period of religious atheism, I think the first nudge I got really out of it was with my first psychedelic experience. This is like when I started to see, because you get this like very strong feeling that is difficult to describe it than something else other than the religious feeling, you know, a feeling of like awe and divinity in a way. And there was this And I get like, I started to think that maybe also a lot of religions have come out of psychedelics because like in this, at the time I also felt the presence of some being that felt very divine. Even though it didn't like look really like dragon or anything, but it felt like this was a dragon for some reason. And at the same time, since you have like no sense of self, so I felt this sense of oneness with that being. And I can totally understand if somebody was like maybe, how to say, have less information about how the world works, that you would have this experience and well, it's like, okay, well, there is this dragon god out there. I'm entirely sure I saw him. And then you build the temple, the dragon temple, and start to sacrifice versions or whatever to that god or whatever. But one thing that I really felt also is that, okay, maybe there could be something, not necessarily a god or whatever, but maybe there's something more than we just see here in this world. Perhaps, I don't know. I became more open to the possibility that this could be. Before I was like, no, it's a cut to black when we die and that's it. Right. But also at the same time, the Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Islam and so on, they felt really ridiculous to me. Like it's almost, I felt like it was almost offensive to that experience that I had. That something so, how to say, rigid like Islam or Christianity, for example, would be the explanation.
Jag är inte helt säker på att det är de abrahamitiska religionernas faktiska innehåll som är det som är offensivt, utan snarare hur en del av våra hjärnor läser dem. Så det beror på vilken del av, inte hjärna, men vilken del av dig som läser det. Om du läser Bibeln genom ett dualistiskt filter så kommer du uppfatta den på ett visst sätt. Om du också läser Bibeln på ett bokstavligt sätt så kommer du läsa den på ett visst sätt. Men om du läser Bibeln på ett bortom dualistiskt sätt, om du läser Bibeln metaforiskt, så tror jag att där finns, som Jordan Peterson kallar det, metaforiska sanningar som är värdefulla, som är insiktsfulla och väldigt djupa. Men jag tror också det handlar om var du står när du tittar, var du befinner dig när du läser, hur du tar in det. Alla de abrahamitiska religionerna har mystiska falanger och djup. Där finns ofta ett fält av icke-dualism. Där finns ofta ett bortom. Men mitt stora problem med de abrahamitiska religionerna, det är att alla säger egentligen en sak. Skärp dig nu, det blir bättre sen.
Right.
Vilket är bullshit.
Nej.
Så här. Och det skapar separation. För det skapar en icke-närvaro. Det skapar rädsla inför framtiden. Tänk om jag är en dålig människa. Tänk om jag inte hamnar i himlen. Tänk om jag inte får min pension. Du vet, alla de här. Medan de monistiska religionerna, medan liksom daoismen, zaratruismen, buddhismen, de är mer it's all great right now. Alltså, du har allt du behöver. Du är hel. Du är inte syndig. Du är inte dålig. Chilla. Det är inte så här, det kommer bli bra. Det är bra.
Yeah, it's partly that, but also the thing is, it's very interesting also to being born and raised in a super religious society with where everything basically is centered around religion. And sometimes it's interesting for me when I talk to Swedes here, and maybe they don't really understand what religion means to deeply religious people, and how they can actually really, really believe all that in even a literal sense. Because in Egypt, people don't take the Quran or the Hadith and so on in a metaphorical way at all.
Nej.
This is actually because, and also there is an interesting nuance in how many Christians and many Muslims relationship with the text, because in Muslim majority countries, definitely in the Middle East, definitely in Egypt, people don't see the Quran as the word of God. They see the Quran as the literal speech of God. And there is some kind of like difference there, because if you think it's the word of God, you can think like, God kind of like has inspired somebody who has basically translated this into in his own fallible understanding in the context of his culture and history and so on. But if it is the literal speech of the divine, word for word, the room for maneuver becomes much less. And you start to think, okay, well, but God said that. God said, for example, that homosexuality is forbidden. God said that I'm allowed to beat my disobedient wife, and so on. Or that Muhammad said, like, because these are things that I used to believe as well, that Muhammad said that the last hour will not come until the Muslims would fight against the Jews and the Muslims would kill them.
Jag tror det blir värdefullt här också för att förstå vad det betyder när du säger Koranen är Guds faktiska ord. Så måste du gå tillbaka och förklara vad du menar när du säger Gud.
Ja.
För det finns ju väldigt olika tolkningar på vad det är. Är Gud en extern entitet? Eller är Gud summan av oss? För om Gud är summan av oss och Koranen är Guds bokstavliga ord, då är Koranen vårt visdomsdestillat. Right? Och då är det så här, okej. Och visdomsdestillatet i den regionen, under den perioden, var att homosexualitet var en synd. Och att du fick slå din fru. Vilket är sant. Okej. Men det betyder också att om det ska fortsätta vara ett visdomsdestillat, så behöver det reformeras och uppdateras. För vi kan inte leva efter visdomsdestillatet från den perioden i den regionen idag.
I agree about that. Again, to look at them, and this is why I think for Islam to, if it would have a chance to go forward, then Muslims have to reform their relationship with the scripture.
Yeah.
Because to the majority of Muslims, in Muslim majority countries in the Middle East, this is the message that God has sent as the perfect message to the end of times, basically. And it is an omniscient God who sees the future.
Men står det någonstans i Koranen? Står det uppdatera inte den här texten? Står det här ska gälla för alltid? Finns det en sån del liksom?
I can't remember the exact verses, but it is a very, I think it is. It exists. It definitely exists as this is the last message, kind of. That Muhammad is the last prophet. This is definitely there. That Muhammad is the last prophet. Okay. This is why it's very blasphemous when somebody comes after and say I'm a prophet, because it says that this is it. So in that sense, it becomes also a bit more difficult, and it's a bit more difficult. Like if I would, look, I used to believe this thing with the throne of Allah shakes out of anger when two men have sex. It's very difficult to really believe this as a literal truth and be open towards gay people, for example. It's very difficult to believe in the prophecy that we, the Muslims, will fight against the Jews and kill them, and at the same time be, well, okay. Well,
hey,
yeah, exactly. The whole thing with the Jews, it's okay. And this... And the same, you heard the story about the masturbation thing. This has been
Please tell it.
So there is like in the hadith that says that if you masturbate, you would be resurrected on Judgment Day with your hand pregnant, and Allah and everyone will see your shame. So I remember that this was something that I was like thinking about all the time when I started masturbating, and even it was such a stressful thing for me that I started to keep a diary with me trying to quit masturbation.
Right.
And I was like, detailing my experience with it and how I'm like trying to quit and failing several times a day.
Har du kvar den dagboken?
My mother has it. And there's all kind of myth also that there's like masturbation is like making you weak and you'll not be able to have sex and not be able to have children, things like that. and I used to write this diary in English. And I remember one day I come into my bedroom and I see my mother sitting with the diary, and she's just like looking at me, and I just felt like I want to sink into the floor. But my mother's English is not that good, so she saw that I'm saying that I'm addicted to masturbation, that masturbation is making me weak, God is angry, and so on. So she thought that maybe masturbation is like a drug or something. So she was like, "What's this masturbation thing? Get it out, show it to me." And I was like, "What? No, Mom!" And I had to like sit down with her and explain to her what I meant by this. This was not a nice experience.
Oh, wow.
But this also comes from that belief, because I really believe that.
Yeah.
And things like so, and it affects also how you, like my aunt, for example, when I was 11 or something, she asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I told her I want to join Hamas, wage jihad against the Jews and kill them. And this was for me like totally normal thing to say, like something I should be proud of.
And you were how old?
11.
Oh, it's like my daughter. It's like my daughter saying she would like to join Hamas.
Imagine that.
Oh, wow. So if we go back a few steps, and if you were to share your first doubt, your first starting point, when did you start to question your religious beliefs back in Egypt?
It's difficult to say an exact point, but I've developed a theory maybe about how this has arisen. I think partly it's my father who did that without meaning to. Because my parents, they sent me to private schools where everything was taught in English. So I grew up with there's something in being exposed to, like, let's say, intellectual produce that's outside of your culture. So I was reading books in English, movies and so on, kind of like broadens your horizon a little bit. And then my father really, really encouraged me to read a lot. So I was I was a bookworm as a child, a bit weird. And then I think this kind of developed maybe some kind of critical thinking, and then I started to don't want to take things for granted as just what people tell me is right and wrong, we should also keep in mind that most religious people, and definitely most Muslims as well, they take religion out of inheritance, not out of conviction. So there was not a point before when I had a different view of reality and so on, and somebody had to convince me that God exists. This is something that I've been taught and indoctrinated into since basically I started to understand words.
And not only religious people, I mean most people inherit their values.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a midlife crisis or something traumatic happen to them, or just an excuse to see yourself from the outside, they just carry that on to their kids.
Ja, det kan man säga. And I think at some point I was like, okay, well, I want to have a more genuine belief, and I want to strengthen my own belief by studying the scripture and the history of Islam thoroughly.
Hur gammal var du då?
Det var 2007 typ. So I was, 22 maybe?
Okay.
22 years old. And then I started to do that. I started to study the Quran and its interpretation within its historical context, and also it's very important also for people who study Quran to understand that the Quran it's not in its chronological order. It's actually from the surahs that are longer to the shorter.
Okay.
And then I started to read in the chronological order with the history of Islam at the same time, because this is very important, because in Islam there is this principle called the principle of abrogation. So if there are two verses in the Quran that basically are against each other, contradict one another, you have to take the verse that was later on. And this, for example, is very important when it comes to alcohol, because drinking was not forbidden right away. It was actually forbidden on 3 stages. So, for example, in the Quran, first it says like, quite often the Quran is like God is talking to Muhammad. So first there was the verse that says, they ask you, like the Muslims, they ask you about gambling and alcohol. Say that there are benefits to them and there are harms in them, but their harms are more than their benefits. So there was no kind of forbidding at all.
Och kronologiskt så kom den först.
Ja, precis. And then after that, after a while came another verse that says, say to the believers not to approach the prayers when they are drunk. So apart from that, it was okay. And then came the forbidding verse. Say to, I can't remember the exact, but something like, say to the believers that gambling and alcohol are from the work of the devil, and do not get near them. And this was the verse that banned drinking, for example. And there are if you see it in its chronological order, you also would start to see a lot of differences in Muhammad's actual journey. As basically he started to get more and more power and moved from Mecca to where he was like, because the Mecca verses are a bit more friendly, because he didn't have like many supporters, and like, you know, you have your religion and I have mine. These are things in the Quran. And then more and more after he started to get more supporters and moved to Medina and so on, and started to get more power, Islam started to get more of the verses in the Quran started to get more militaristic, basically. And this is why the last surah chronologically in the Quran, Surah At-Tawbah, is the most violent surah in the Quran, basically, because this was at the height of the Islamic militarism, one can say, or that in the time of Muhammad, and this could also explain. We can talk. Historic accounts are interesting to analyze and quotes and so on, because it's not always easy to know who's done what. But also this explains how the companions of Muhammad, right after him, and Muhammad had started it already a little bit, they started their military campaigns against others unprovoked, like the Persians, they started like all over. And there is the I think it was the I can't remember how it's pronounced, the Sassanid Empire. I think when the Muslims started to attack them, and the emperor, that they told him like, but we haven't done anything to you, like why are you attacking us? And they said, but this is what we have been commanded by Allah and his prophet. And maybe they said so, maybe they didn't, but it could explain at least that if the message of Muhammad was really a message of peace as its ground, then his companions must have really, really misunderstood it. Because they just went on a series of wars afterwards.
Men är det verkligen budskapet då? Är budskapet i Koranen verkligen fred? Eller är Muhammads budskap verkligen fred? Eller finns det någonting annat till? Och jag säger det inte från en plats av egentligen särskilt mycket dömande eller tyckande. Jag är nyfiken, för att om du tittar på till exempel Bibeln, så är det ju väldigt stor skillnad på första liksom Gamla testamentet och Nya testamentet. Gamla testamentet är ju väldigt våldsamt och krigiskt, och den guden är ju hämndlysten och hård. Han är som en abusive father, verkligen. Och de verktygen han använder för att uppfostra människan är verkligen liksom en piska och bälte. Liksom, han är som som en pappa från Mellanöstern liksom. Ja, men verkligen så här, det är hårda verktyg, men tittar du på Nya testamentet, där är det ju ett tydligt kärleksbudskap. Så att där är det nästan reversed. Right. Att det går från det grova, från det hårda till det kanske mjukare. Och någonting som jag har funderat på är kanske att den kristna världen behövde, om jag nu diplomatiskt ska tolka det som tough love först, tydlig uppfostran och sen lite mer guidance, lite mer kärleksfull, mjuk guidance. Men Nya testamentet hade inte varit möjligt om det inte vore för gamla som fundament. Att du behövde säga, okej, kolla här, sätt dig ner. Döda inte din granne. Gör inte det. Ligg inte med din grannes fru. Så här, lyssna bara på mig nu. Fokus. One God. Nej, inte den där guldkalven där borta. Här är jag. Och om du verkligen förstår metaforen i det, så förstår du också någonstans att det är som att ha en stökig skolklass i lågstadiet. Du kan kanske inte börja prata om komplexitet och nyanser, utan det är så här: sitt ner, lyssna. Slå inte på din kompis. Tafsa inte på henne. Lyssna på mig. Och det är liksom grunden. Och när du har lagt den grunden, det finns en mognad. Som om mänskligheten vore en människa, så var vi kanske 7-8 år gamla där i början. Och då behövde vi Gamla testamentet. Och sen när vi har börjat växa upp, så kan vi bli mer och mer komplexa, mer och mer empatiska. Och då kan vi ta till oss Nya testamentet. Och jag tänker att de abrahamitiska religionerna antingen behöver allihopa uppdateras och reformeras. För jag tror att vi är på väg in i någonting annat nu, som mänsklighet, som den stora kroppen, där vi inte längre behöver just det här fundamentet. Så antingen behöver vi en uppdaterad version av det, eller någonting annat.
Yeah, I guess there is something in that, but at the same time, if you look at like Eastern religions, for example, Buddhism, Jainism, and so on, they are pretty old, and it was possible to have something more peaceful than the Old Testament and Koran and so on. And I think there is definitely also a cultural aspect in this, because one thing that I'm very interested in as well.
Menar du att det är skillnad på kulturer, Omar?
Ja, exactly. This is blasphemy.
Nu börjar det. Jag tar avstånd från Omar Makram.
I think one thing that's like super interesting also to analyze pre-Islamic Arabia and the culture there, because it's like it's a very rich culture as well, and there's a lot of poetry, beautiful poetry that from this time and so on, and their traditions and habits and so on, and they were warring tribes, and it's but also in an interesting way. Like, for example, your status as a knight in the tribe would be measured by how beautiful poetry you write and how many people you have killed. So this basically would be like your CV.
It's your clout.
So that's your CV. Like, I've killed that many people, and this is how beautiful my poetry is at the same time.
I love that. I love that. Put that on LinkedIn. So, should we hire this guy? No, we only killed 12. We need someone more experienced.
So your status in the tribe was very much based on that. And speaking of honor culture and so on, they didn't have this kind of like sexually like kyskhet-relaterad hederskultur. They were super hedonistic sexually. In pre-Islamic Arabia, polyandry was allowed, that women can have several husbands.
For sure.
So that's something that Islam banned afterwards. And they had like all these kind of like really strange, they have one form of marriage called rahat, in which basically it's a gangbang. So a woman would marry a bunch of men and would have sex with them on one night, and then when she gets pregnant, she is the one who gets to choose the father. and he cannot say no. So basically that even if he looks super much like that other guy, but like, no, you're the father, and you have to acknowledge him.
Okay.
And they had also this like a little bit like breeding. So if there was a knight that is known for his like, good qualities in the tribe, a couple could basically, the wife could go and go to the house of this knight and be with him until he impregnates her. And then she would go back to her husband and they would raise that child as their son.
Men det låter som mycket av det jag har läst om hur det funkade i nomadsamhällena, alltså i stammarna. Att en kvinna när hon var fertil så låg hon med flera män. Och sen så blev hon befruktad. Men långt tillbaka i vår stamkultur så valde hon inte vem som var pappan. Utan hon blev gravid och sen födde hon barnet. Vilket betyder att det här barnet tillhörde stammen. Och då var alla de här männen potentiella pappor. Så alla brydde sig om det här barnet.
That's interesting, but I would say in Arabia it was different. Yeah, exactly. Arabia, it was. This is also why I have such a long name. There, the ancestry is very important. You have to show who your ancestors are.
Jo, men det här beror ju på att vi blev settlers. Alltså det här började ju först när vi började äga mark. Då blev det ju viktigt vem som tillhörde vem, för att det handlade om arv. Right? Och hela det territoriella spelet och liksom, det var ju också för att det var marken där vi odlade maten och vi började äga, och då blev ju namn och efternamn och vem som är gift med vem. Alltså allt det där blev ju viktigt för att det fanns mark att skydda. Men innan dess, jag pratar ju om pre-agriculture.
Right.
Då fanns ju en helt annan kultur. För att då var inte ditt efternamn viktigt så att, som du gav till ditt barn, för det fanns inget att koppla namnet till. Du hade ingen brevlåda.
Ja, det är sant. But it also, if we go back to the whole thing about like militarism and like a bit there was some kind of cultural aggression as well, because still it was there was this example, speaking of this status related honor culture. There was a tribe that wanted to show that they actually have a higher status than another tribe, and the mother of the leader of this tribe wanted to humiliate the mother of the leader of the other tribe. So they basically when they became invited to like a meal at their place, the mother tried to be a bit krångligt. She tried to make the other mother serve her, and she got super offended, and then she called on her son, and then he came in and killed that woman and her son, basically, because that was super offensive thing to do. So this is the environment where Islam was introduced. So it is not also surprising that it became a super militaristic language as well there, because this was the culture. And the thing is, it's also a very potent combo. If you have already this kind of like militarism and you make it holy, so you are doing it for God now, not just for your tribe or something. No, this is like, and even to make it more attractive, there's no way to lose. So for example, if you go to war, and so you either win and you have like sex slave and loot and everything and you won, or if you die, you go to heaven, you become a martyr and you will get your 72 virgins and all that. And this was a very successful, it's actually very impressive if you think about it. It's a very impressive invasionary ideology if you want to dominate others, and they were successful.
Yeah. Sant. Så det du gjorde var egentligen att du som 22-åring började Du läste mycket böcker och du började också studera Koranen och du började studera sutrorna parallellt och haditerna parallellt med att du lärde dig mer om profeten Muhammed och om islams historia. Vad ledde det fram till och när bestämde du dig för att var det ett tillfälle där du bestämde dig för att nu måste jag göra en förändring i mitt liv, eller var det någonting som hände och vad hände?
It was a very long process actually. It took about 3 years where I was trying to wrestle with making sense of the scripture, trying to make sense of like the Quran and the Hadith together. And one thing that helped me a lot actually was this chronological order of the Quran. But some of the Hadith kind of went against some things in the Quran and so on. So at some point I rejected the Hadith and became what is called Quranist, relying only on the Quran as the only true source.
För de som inte vet, vad är skillnad på Koranen och haditerna?
So the Quran is the basically the speech of God. It's the most holy scripture in Islam. Then the hadith are the words and saying, the words and actions of Muhammad. But they are also somewhat holy. Like they have a little bit less status, but they are somewhat holy because in Islam, Muhammad is believed to have a direct connection with God. There's even this verse in Arabic, "Ma huwa illa wahyun yuha." So det betyder att that he does not speak of his own will, but these are revelations that come to him. So his actions and words are a bit taken as something that is directly inspired by God.
Han är manifestation och kanal för Gud.
Precis så. So it's not the speech of God, but like something inspired by him.
Right.
But there are questions about the authenticity of some of the hadith and so on. Then I started to, this does not make sense, and there's no way to really be able to verify. So I decided to ignore the hadith and go with the Quran for a while. And then the more I read also, the more it started not to make much sense to me. I didn't like this idea that there's this omniscient, all-powerful God that basically could have created human beings in whatever form he wants to, but he creates them weak in order to sin. And even though he knew that this would happen and he could have created them otherwise, so when they sin, he becomes angry. And even though he's all kind, he decided to send them to burn in hell for their sins that he created them to do. For me, this started to, hang on a second, this does not make a lot of sense. And then I started to doubt that this could be true. And also I started to have it started to be some friction between if you can say my exposure to Western culture and how I started to question why women cannot be equal to men, for example, or why is it so wrong with homosexuality and so on. Why does God care about this? Why do they have to be punished for that? Why do people who are not Muslim have to be punished? And then I started to basically...
Ifrågasatte du det i ditt eget tänkande, eller var det någonting du sa?
No, I actually didn't. In Egypt, I was not speaking at all openly about these things. My parents actually discovered that I had left Islam when I came to Sweden.
All right.
Yeah, it was not before. So I was not open in that way about my views. It was
closet atheist.
Ja, det kan man säga. So in the end, after this process, I was like, okay, you know what? I don't really believe in this shit. And I don't really think it's good either. And then...
Och då var du hur gammal ungefär?
Det var typ 2010, så around 25.
Okay.
Around 25.
Precis, så det tog 2-3 år av den här processen?
Precis. And then basically the point at which this whole the whole saga has come to a climax is when I started to talk about this with a friend of mine in a cafe. And in Egypt, we're not as quiet as Swedes. So when you go to a cafe or something like this, everybody's like trying to speak as loud as possible. You're having like individual conversations, and then there is the bigger conversation where everyone is like hearing each other and so on.
Det låter som Sista Måltiden ungefär.
Ja, a little bit. Exactly. So basically, when I was talking about things about like my thoughts about Muhammad and so, and back then I started to have a very hostile, like ultra anti attitude towards Allah and Muhammad and so on. So, and then basically there were, I was caught up in the whole fervor of it, and I didn't notice that there were some people like who overheard what I was saying and the discussion. Then they started to like, they came to us and they started to be very hostile and like, say that, what the fuck am I saying? And these things are like, the state should do something about people like me and so on, or like otherwise the people should. And like they were very threatening. And that place also was close to where I was working. So I actually got a little bit scared.
Vad jobbade du med?
I used to work with shipping. So, and this was like a period of also chaos in Egypt, because this was after the revolution. And it's like many people had this aspiration that now we have made a break with the past, and it actually lined very well with me leaving religion and so on.
Just
and you beginning, like now I can talk, now religion and tradition and these things are something of the past. We had this kind of, definitely I did, and many young people in Egypt did, that we will be a little bit like the West in a way, kind of. But also it was a period of chaos, because back then it was the military junta who was like in charge, and things were not like really functioning very well yet, because it was after a period of extreme chaos when the police had pulled out from the streets and like Mubarak was taken down, and we had to like arrange neighborhood watch and with makeshift Molotov cocktails and spears and things like that to defend our homes, which was actually one of the best experiences I've had in my life.
Hur då?
I've never felt as alive, I would say, when because after the revolution, or like during the revolution, like the police decided to pull out of the street and release criminals from prisons to create chaos and show the people how it would be without order and the police. And they started to be like to loot and kill and so on. And we started to, it's also very interesting how quick it happened, because right away people started to organize and like have these schedules and like, you have your shifts, and we started to like make weapons and things like that. So I remember like I had like my sisters back then at my place and I had this like, kind of like broom. This was like the most common weapon, a broomstick with a big ass knife duct taped to it to make a spear. So it's
so Mad Max.
Yeah. And like and also it's interesting because it happened just like that.
Yeah.
And you can see how culture and civilization can be really fragile. And so
Jo, men också inte bara att det är fragilt. Det jag hör dig säga är också att ordning i form av nya ordningar också ligger latent hela tiden redo. Att vi är så snabba på att hitta ett sätt att organisera oss på och samarbeta.
Ja.
Det har jag sett i andra sammanhang också, inte bara i krissituationer, men på festivaler ute i världen där det inte finns en tydlig arrangör, utan det är mer participatoriskt. Där det förväntas av människor att de ska göra saker tillsammans. Alltså det är matlag och det är vaktlag och det går så här snabbt. Ja. För jag tror att det ligger i våra gener att samarbeta och organisera oss.
Absolut.
Och när det inte finns en befintlig infrastruktur så skapar vi den väldigt, väldigt snabbt.
It was an awesome feeling. At the same time, it was a bit scary. Like I was scared from my sister. So for example, if it was not my shift, I would hear like gunfire and so on, and just like if I would wake up and just like take my spear and go down to face the enemy, kind of. And it was a bit surreal that everything was in order first, and like now I'm standing there with this weird spear and like Molotov cocktails waiting for the people who would come to attack us. and everybody was smoking weed.
Yeah.
There's no police.
Yeah. Det låter som Burning Man. Men vad hände med killarna på kaféet?
Basically, they didn't assault me physically or anything, but I got like really very aggressive, hostile feelings from them. And again, since I had this part of the fear and part of maybe this naivety of like, now we have a new time, a new era with freedom and so on. And I know that the police in Egypt, actually, they are pretty hostile towards like Islamists, very much. And I thought that they would basically, now in this new chapter, they would take my side. But I was super wrong. So basically when I went to the police to say like, I was threatened by these people, they also maybe didn't have in mind that I would really have to explain in detail what was the incident about. And I was like, oh, okay. But why? And then I started to say, well, I didn't really go that much in detail, but I said because it's like that I basically was criticizing Islam and so on, and they like the police officer he got like super upset and he said like, this is what we're getting from the revolution, and this is like, we have contempt of religion law, and you could end up in prison. We will start an investigation about this and so on. I was like, okay, oh shit, I have to get out of here. But they didn't try to like, keep me in the police. Okay. I actually have later on, I read about a situation in Egypt that was very similar to mine. The only difference is the guy didn't come out of the police station. They arrested him right away.
Shit, you were lucky.
I was lucky. So I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. I don't want to like stay until I find out if I will end up in Egyptian prison. Because in Egypt, there is this thing also, apart from the prison sentence you would get, they have, the police has the right to keep you almost indefinitely before trial. So you could, stay in prison for like 10 years before your trial or something. And then your trial, you're found maybe innocent, or even if you're found innocent, but okay, you had already 10 years in Egyptian prison. So I decided I have to get out of here. And I did.
Och när du valde att lämna Egypten, hur köpte du en flygbiljett och bara satte dig på ett plan och drog, eller hur funkar det?
Well, I basically, one thing that was also very beneficial for me, that I had a good job and I used to travel actually quite often back and forth. The company that I was working for, they were also based in Germany, and I used to travel to Europe often and so on for vacation and things like that. So it was not difficult for me to get visa again. So I got a Schengen visa from the French embassy first. It was the easiest to get visa from. And then I was like, okay, because I didn't really have a plan. I was scared and I wanted to get out.
Och nu är du typ 28?
Det var jag lämnade Egypten i juli 2011. Så det var typ I was not even 26 yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And first I was like, okay, where am I going? I want somewhere like relatively cheap where I can live off my savings. Basically also like a country where I can get by somewhat speaking English, and also so I chose Estonia. And I was like, I really like the fact that they are supposedly the most atheist people in Europe. So at the time this was very attractive for me.
Det var också någonting med ration mellan hur många män och kvinnor det fanns.
Exakt. So I was like, they had like a low sex ratio. I was like, oh, okay.
Vilket betyder?
That basically there's like more women than men. I was like, okay, that's a good contrast with Egypt and so on, being a super sexually conservative society. So yeah, so I went to Estonia and I met a girl there who, what attracted me to her, she was this very bohemian, free-spirited artist, and but plot twist, like after we broke up, she converted to Islam and married an Islamist from Turkey. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes I feel we are in a simulation.
Wow. Fast vet du vad? Det är ju inte så konstigt. Hon gjorde bara en inverterad Omar.
Yeah, I tend to have this effect on women, it seems, that after a while with me, they're like, I want the furthest thing away from this man. So one of them, okay, I want, like, this guy hates Islam and he's a super atheist. I'm going to convert to Islam and marry an Islamist. And the latest one, she was like, okay, I want the furthest thing away from this man. I will be lesbian forever. And she discovered that she's lesbian.
Jo, men jag menar, du gjorde ju samma sak i din relation till religion. Du gjorde ju också så här att du tog ju den här. Du gick ju inte från islam till nyans. Du gick ju från islam till Richard Dawkins.
Ja.
Jag tänker att de här kvinnorna kanske också kommer in i en psykedelisk fas sen.
It is possible.
Well, så här, jag kanske är hippie-islamist eller bisexuell.
Ja, could be. So first I went to Estonia. And then basically I was there for a while, and then I just like got comfortable. I had like a visa for 1 month, and I stayed almost for 3 years. And then after the breakup, I was like, okay, because during this time also the crackdown on people who leave and criticize Islam has really escalated in Egypt.
Like how?
More and more cases of people who are, because after the revolution, the regime wanted to kind of, there was motreaktion that the regime wanted to restore order. So they started to clamp down on anybody who deviates from the norm. And then people, even like some people who would put their like religious views as atheist, for example, on their Facebook and so on, they could be like reported by somebody, and yeah, it can be viewed as contempt of religion, because it's also what is contempt of religion, you know, like you can, even declaring you're an atheist can be interpreted as contempt of religion, for example. And a lot of other examples. There's like also a guy who's that sometimes I get like almost a survival guilt when I look at his videos. He's a brilliant guy. Egyptian guy called Sharif Gaber, who makes like really brilliant videos. I would really recommend that everybody checks him out. He's an ex-Muslim as well.
Vad heter han?
Sharif Gaber.
Sharif Gaber.
And
vi kan lägga det i infon också.
And the problem is he's being like sought by the police, and he has like he's prevented from leaving Egypt as well. So he's basically in hiding.
Okay.
And it has been very sad to see his Twitter, for example, and when he's struggling for freedom and saying that he's like depressed and he would just wants to be himself and so on. And I'm thinking, damn, that could have been me. Yeah. So yeah, so Estonia for a while, and then with this, like I started then to be also more and more open on Twitter and so on about like my views and things like that. And then when we broke up, I was like, okay, there's no way I can go back to Egypt now, and I didn't really think that Estonians would give me asylum. So I'm very interested in European politics in general, so I saw how welcoming Sweden was to refugees at the time.
Och vilket år var det?
2014.
14, så det var Reinfeldt.
Yeah,
öppna våra hjärtan.
I was like, okay, open your hearts, I'm coming.
Du tog det bokstavligt.
Exactly.
Fredrik, I'm coming baby, hold on, let's go.
Exactly. So I just like packed and got on my way, basically.
Just det.
And it was also like, it was an adventure because I didn't want to be caught on the way, because if you're caught, then I would have to apply for asylum in Lithuania or Latvia or any country that's on the way. So I wanted to make it at least until Germany. And I had to like take like these websites, blablacar.com. It's a website of like carpooling for people who are traveling around Europe. So I used that actually, so that I avoid all the trains and buses and flights and so on. Until I made it basically to Germany and took the ferry to Trelleborg.
Trelleborg, ja.
Yes. Jag
kom med min familj med samma färja.
Är det sant?
Från Tyskland till Trelleborg.
Wow,
yes,
so
sir.
Cool. Yeah, and then I just like applied for asylum there in Malmö. And then we were shipped. We were told that we're going to be housed in Stockholm, and everybody was like super happy. And then we got on the bus, and then we ended somewhere in the woods. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm not from Sweden, but I really bet that this is not the capital.
Och var det någonstans?
Flen.
Ja. Det är ju Sörmland i alla fall. Det är nära.
Yes. So this is what people told me as well. It's almost Stockholm. I was like, okay. And then I had again this like naive belief based on the image I got, from like how Sweden was signaling the whole thing, that I would come and just like be honest about what happened and my case and my views and so on, and then I would just like get protection. But I was so wrong.
Så vad hände?
My experience with the migration agency at the time is not that they try to verify whether I had a case or not. They try to find stuff that would make them reject my case. This was my experience, which part of me understands and part of me doesn't, So I understand that they would have to verify as much as possible whether my claim is genuine or not. But they...
Och din claim var att om jag återvänder så dör jag?
Nej, det är inte det.
Vad var din claim?
It's basically that people who leave and criticize Islam are being persecuted in Egypt, and we have contempt of religion law that I could end up in prison.
Okay.
So that was it. And the thing is, they acknowledged that.
Och de trodde på dig?
Yeah. Nej, they said that they acknowledged that people who leave and criticize Islam in Egypt are being persecuted and they should get asylum.
But you're not one of them.
Exact.
Okay.
So they refuse to acknowledge that I have left Islam, even like with the social media activity and stuff, and they would be like, yeah, but maybe this is photoshopped, and I'm like, but you can see this online. It's like, for me it was a bit strange. And then they rejected my claim, and then I appealed, and they rejected again. And they had basically two main points. One, that I have not shown that I had left Islam, and had I been able to prove that I had left Islam, I would have gotten asylum. Two, that I did not provide them with proof that the Egyptian authorities are aware of my views. And I'm like, I'm not sure, I cannot apply for an atheism certificate from the Egyptian embassy. Like, what do you mean? So what I did is like, I was going to get deported, and what I did is like, okay, now I have to refute those 2 points that they have against me. How can I prove beyond doubt that I'm no longer a Muslim? Because some people say, Emmett, why just eat some pork or drink alcohol? I was like, well, there are Muslims who do that. It's not. And I thought, okay, what would be the one thing that no Muslim would ever do? So I made a video where I talked about my views on Islam, talked about my case with the migration board, what happens to people who leave Islam, Muslim majority countries in Egypt and so on. And I was like, what is the one thing that no Muslim would ever do? And that would be to desecrate the Quran. So I had a copy of the Quran, I spat on it, tore it apart, stomped on it, and set it on fire. And I was like, okay, that would be my proof. Then I showed this to some of my friends here in Sweden who are aware of my case. They were like, oh shit, okay, maybe you'll get asylum, but we don't know if you will live long enough to enjoy it if you release that video. And they suggested that I send it to a migration agency first. So I uploaded on Google Drive and sent them an email with the link. And in the same email, I CC'd the Egyptian embassy and the Egyptian Interior Ministry and Egyptian Foreign Ministry, so that Migrationsverket sees that, well, here's your proof. They are aware of my views now.
So they are aware and you are aware, but the video is not public.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Migrationsverket could not open the link for some weird reason. Maybe they don't have cloud sharing.
Det låter inte som att Migrationsverkets IT-kunskaper är på topp.
Nej, it was actually pretty bad.
Försökte vara diplomatisk.
And then they asked me to send the video on a USB flash drive. So I did. And then they lost it. And I was like, okay, come on. You have to give me something here. And then they were going to make the decision without it. And then I was like, okay, then I put it on YouTube, but unlisted. So only people whom I give the link can see it. And they were able to see it. And then they rejected it, saying that the video had too few views. I was like, okay, fuck that. And then I went public with it and pushed it on social media and so on. And it got quite a bit of traction. The reactions were really interesting as well. Like, there were negative reactions, positive reaction. But one thing that I didn't foresee, that so many people who have left Islam, both here in Sweden and the Muslim majority countries, reached out to me and have seen this as some kind of very refreshing act of rebellion, especially like if people, I've had people from Pakistan, and Bangladesh and so on, like write to me and say, this was amazing to see that, because they are in countries where if they were even like try to criticize Islam a bit, they would be butchered on the street. And this was very interesting and very, it felt good to have this kind of like Yemen's cop in a way, and that it means something even like just not about me, about something bigger. And then people asked me to make another video where I basically talk more about how and why I left Islam in detail. And then I did, and that video got even more views than the Koran video without the theatrics, so that was a bit confusing to me.
Men kände du någon sorg? Kände du någon smärta? Skam, skuld? Jag menar, vad för slags känslor upplevde du när du stod med den här boken och liksom brände den och betedde dig på ett sätt? För att den här boken har ju varit central i hela din uppväxt. Det har varit en helig skrift för dig. Det kan ju inte varit... Hur kände du när du gjorde det?
At the time, it felt actually liberating, because with a bit of Jordan Peterson symbolism now, it was me personally killing tradition for me. This has been the tradition of my people, my culture, and my whole past history. And it had to die for me to move forward. In a way, this is how I felt. But then again, had I not been kind of forced to do that to prove that I had left Islam, I would not have done it. Not necessarily because I think it's wrong, but because maybe it's just not my style. But if I would go back in time, I would do the same thing. Because this was the only way that this could work.
Det var för att överleva egentligen.
Ja, precis. Ja.
Okej. Jag antar att det funkade, för du sitter här.
For the time being. Sometimes I wonder, like, if they would expand hets mot folkgrupp to include criticism of Islam, then I would end up in prison in Sweden. That would be super. Super ironic.
No, men det hade ju varit en kafkaesk runkfantasi liksom. Eller hur?
And I would be like, okay, we definitely live in a simulation. Because in a simulation, if I was like the architect of this simulation, this is what I would have done.
If Chang Frick was the architect of the simulation, that would be the case.
Could be.
Okej. Så vad sa Migrationsverket då? När allt det här hände och videon fick en massa visningar och delningar och den andra videon fick en massa visningar och delningar?
I think first...
Och de hittade USB-minnet.
Nej, jag vet inte om de gör det där.
Det är fortfarande ute där. Postnord hittade om några veckor. Vad fan är det här?
Exactly. Yeah, it took quite a long time as well. So this was, can't remember when I think I released this in the beginning of 2015.
Och då var du kvar i Flen?
I moved actually to a friend in Norrköping because in Flen I was not feeling safe because I lived with Syrian people and the village Haliforsnäs that I was living in basically just a Syrian, at the time it was just a Syrian village and I didn't have control about people who come in and out and so on. I was like, if this gets big, right, I'll get in trouble. So I was staying with a friend in Norrköping at the time when I released the video. And then it took I wrote some articles also that were published here in Sweden about my critique of Islam and so on. And in the end, Migrationsverket acknowledged that, okay, well, here's your asylum, kind of. That was in June 2017. So it took, yeah.
Just det, och det var nog första gången jag hörde talas om dig. Det var nog i 2017.
Är det?
I juni. Jag tror att det var i juni 2017. Du var med i Arons podd första gången.
Ja, det var jag.
Ja, det var nog första gången jag hörde din röst.
Det var då. And then in the end I got it and so that
Gjorde du någon press eller någon media under den här perioden förutom?
Well,
det satt du i Nyhetsmorgon och pratade om här är 3 sätt för hur du får stanna i Sverige.
Well, actually most people here in Sweden were really quiet about this. It was Sakina Madon who first retweeted something about that, a little bit Humanisterna as well. But it took them a while. They were a bit skeptical about publishing something that is anti-Islam. Humanisterna, I mean, Sakina, hon är grym.
Ni hade Sakina i förrgår?
Ja,
i Sista Måltiden.
Ja, det blir
kul att höra det.
She and Mustafa debated barnäktenskap. This will be something.
Mustafa har klivit in i sin patriarka. Alltså, verkligen.
And then one thing that was interesting, I actually, when I got a lot of threats and so on, I decided to participate in an exhibition where I put these threats on the wall on the walls in a museum in Norrköping.
Som konst?
Ja.
Oh wow.
Both like
how Lars Vilks of you.
Yeah, eller hur? And it was both the compliment, the positive feedback and the negative feedback side by side, and a little bit about the ex-Muslim struggle in Muslim majority countries and things like that. And they had to the commune had to send guards for the exhibition for it to be shown.
Har du träffat Lars förresten?
Nej, det har jag inte.
Det ska vi lösa.
Eller? Ja, jag har en gång, men väldigt kort.
Det vore skitkul att göra. Att få göra ett samtal med dig och Lars i...
This would be definitely interesting.
Det ska vi fixa.
And then Niklas Orenius från Dagens Nyheter, he wrote some reportage on the whole thing. My case, I mean, and so on. So that was also interesting. And then things started after this period of because it was a long period of uncertainty, stress and fear. It was 3 years when I didn't know if I would get to stay or be deported. And I was stuck in the limbo basically.
Mellan 2017 och...
I came 2014.
Okej, mellan 14 och 17 så var det 3 år av...
Exakt.
Och 17 fick du besked.
Ja, and I got several rejections and so on. It was very strong påverkan på mig.
Såklart.
And then afterwards when I got citizenship I was okay, that's nice. And then I moved to Stockholm and started to learn Swedish then. 2017, ja precis. And then I also got a job and started to work with the honor culture question.
Just det, hur fick du det jobbet?
Well,
var annonsen vi söker en koranbrännare som man tänka sig att...
It was an event public event where I talked to people and so on who also were like active in this area, and they liked my views because also I was a part of like in Egypt there is a strong honor culture as well, and I was a part of that. And it was a part of my rebellion against this break from tradition and religion and so on, that I also, it was very natural for me that this would be something that I would also work against. So it was really, and I worked with this for like 4 years.
Och vad gjorde du då? Var du ute och föreläste?
Det gjorde jag. Skrev artiklar, så jag jobbade mest med opinionsbildning och utbildning. Så jag föreläsningar, deltar i debatter och skriver artiklar och sånt. And I also like wrote a manga book that is about honor culture called Förbjuden kärlek.
Manga book? Oh wow.
And then I go, like I used to go to schools. I'm still open for doing that again, even outside of my work, to have workshops with the students about these questions, about honor culture, about gender equality, about individual freedom, and so on. And this was very interesting for me to interact with young people in Sweden in this way.
Vad fick du för respons på dina artiklar och dina workshops? Jag tänker mig att det är ändå Sverige, så att jag kan tänka mig att du får väldigt mycket beröm för ditt mod och för att du gjort det här, men att det också finns en hel del kritik.
Well, I think also one thing that has been like an eye-opener for me in Sweden, how difficult it is still to criticize Islam. And first, when I came to Sweden as well, I got involved with like anti-racist groups and so on, and like very much the leftist movement here in Sweden. And to people who are more liberal, progressive, who come from the Middle East, for us, Islam and religion is our right-wing ideology. So we kind of expect that people who are progressive and liberal and so on here in Sweden to be anti-Islam. And then when I started to see that, okay, no, this was not the case. Like they are like uncomfortable. They push back when I criticize Islam and so on, even though they don't know really much about it. And I actually got kicked out of an anti-racist group when I was an asylum seeker, which is pretty ironic.
For doing what?
For the Koran video.
So the anti-racist group kicked you out of it because you burnt the Quran?
Yeah. So this was also interesting. And the interesting thing is there also, to be fair.
What was the claim? What was the argument?
Racism maybe, or something.
So you're being racist against your own people?
Yeah, something like that.
How?
Because people cannot differentiate.
Just det, jag glömde det.
They cannot differentiate between Islam and Muslims, that's on one hand, and Islam is very much racified in Sweden, I would say. People see Islam as a race. And then if you criticize Islam, that means you're being racist. But to be also fair, like I would say many, if not most of the people in this group were against me being kicked out, but there were like more people who are very, how to say, aggressive, assertive, maybe a minority who had their say.
Yeah, I know the type.
Yes. So
the AAA, the assertive, aggressive activists.
Oh,
yep.
So that was that, and then I started to think, okay, well, hold on, there's something weird here, and I have this. It seems that almost, I don't know if it's a curse or it's my fate to be an eternal blasphemer. So whenever somebody says that there's this thing, even though you believe in it, you're not supposed to say it. I just want to say nothing else apart from that. And this has caused me problems, but also has opened possibilities. And I decided that I will keep doing that, even though I get consequences all the time. Blasphemy is my thing, it seems.
Så den delen av dig, upplever du den som mogen?
I think I started to have more and more, especially when I started to see the self is a bit of an illusion as well. I started to observe myself almost outside of myself, as in I'm perceiving how I develop, and how I am, since I also don't believe in free will, as if something that has been set on this path and it's inevitable that is going to walk this path. So I'm accepting myself as I am, accepting my thoughts and desires and feelings and so on, and I'm just like going with it. So I don't perceive it as mature or immature. I perceive it as just, it is what it is. And that's it.
Och anledningen till att jag ställer en fråga och är nyfiken på det är att jag kan känna igen den delen i mig själv också. Men jag kan uppleva att den kan komma från två olika platser. Det kan, om någon säger till exempel, du får inte säga det här ordet. Du får inte prata med den här personen. Du får inte läsa den här boken. Då märker jag att det är någonting i mig som aktiveras. Och sen finns det två olika sätt att göra det på. Det ena är det direkt att så här, nästan som att jag har Tourettes. Att så här, okej. Jag måste säga det. Jag måste läsa den här boken. Jag måste prata med den här personen.
Chang-style.
Chang-style. Och den delen av mig gillar att provocera och trycka till människor. Jag gillar, det finns ett litet haha. Don't tell me what to do, dad.
Right.
Alltså det finns en liten pubertal tonåring energi i den.
Right.
Men sen finns en annan del som gör samma sak. Men det är från en annan plats i mig.
That's interesting.
För att den säger mer så här, vet du vad? Jag tror det är farligt att vi talar om för varandra vad vi får och inte får säga. Jag tror det är farligt när vi börjar begränsa ord. Jag tror det är farligt när vi börjar begränsa tankar. Jag tror inte att det är den vägen vi ska gå. Så det som kommer hända nu är att jag kommer prata med den här personen. För om 1000 personer säger till mig att jag inte ska prata med en person, då tror jag det finns en lärdom. Både en känslomässig lärdom, en mental lärdom, men kanske också en social lärdom i att den här personen pratas med. Och att den här personen får säga sitt. Så det här kanske gör ont. Och jag kommer göra det. Jag vill bara att du kommer ihåg att bara för att det gör ont betyder inte att det är fel. Alltså det finns ett annat språk, en annan energi. Och jag kan ibland, men jag skiftar ju fortfarande emellan. Det är fortfarande så här, ibland vill jag trycka till, ibland vill jag vara liksom så. Men det finns också den här versionen. Men den gör samma sak. Men på ett litet annat sätt. Jag vill ju egentligen inte, jag tycker inte om att provocera.
Samma sak för mig, jag gillar inte det. I just want to be free.
Ja, och sann. Jag pratade med vår gemensamma vän Ashkan Fardost för några veckor sedan i telefon. Vi har lite så här, ibland när saker och ting händer väldigt mycket så har vi så här nattliga samtal där liksom vi kan prata i flera timmar och bara så här hjälpa varandra att somna ungefär. Och då var det så här, okej, worst case scenario. Vad händer om vi blir för mycket för det här landet? Vad händer om vi går fully retard? Vad är worst case? Ja, jag får jobba på ICA. Jag bara, men Ashkan, hur skulle det kännas? Om du gick full truth och jobbade på ICA? Han bara, det skulle kännas nice. Jag bara, jag med. Bra, okej. Och så var det så att någonting lugnade sig. Sen vet jag ju också att det är ju inte worst case. Ens i Sverige. Worst case i Sverige kan också vara Omar Makram, Lars Vilks, Aron Flam, Ann Heberlein. Alltså det finns ju worst case också. Eller som den här, som jag träffade en person som hade i ett kommentarsfält lagt en kommentar. Jag träffade honom igår. I ett kommentarsfält på Paolo Robertos Instagram så hade han lagt en kommentar. Och bara så här, jag hörde dig i Sista Måltiden. Det var värdefullt. Ge inte upp. Typ så här. Och så var det en kvinna som hade gått in. Och hennes Instagram-konto var så här. Det var typ rubriken på hennes Instagram-konto var manshat. Liksom. Någonting kring manshat. Hon går in och svarar bara med, och jag tycker det är hemskt med män som bla 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 så här. Och han hade så här skrivit någonting. Ja, men lite hårt tillbaka. Typ, ja men du kanske så här, drick lite rödvin så blir det bättre. Varpå hon hade gått in på hans privata, eller på hans YouTube-kanal där han hänger med sina barn och börjat dra in hans barn. Och så här börjat liksom gå på, hon hade varit totalt gränslös liksom. Jag bara, just det. Han är inte ens liksom offentlig eller som oss. Vi har ju gjort ett val, upplever jag. Eller flera val.
Yeah.
Alltså snubbe på ett kommentarsfält. Jag träffade honom igår fysiskt på ett live-event. Victor de Almeida som har Dialogiskt hade ett live-event igår med Alexander Bard och Hanif Bali och Leo Kinesen. Det var också så här, det kan vi prata
om.
Nej, men det var också jävligt intressant.
Ja.
Så här. Jag gick därifrån hoppfull.
Aha.
Ja. Jag känner bara, just det. För mig är det så här, jag har ju längtat efter de här samtalen i så många år. Och nu är det flera som håller på.
Right.
Jag känner mig så här, oh wow. Så extrapolera det här 10-15 år.
Ja.
Fett. Nu händer det någonting i Sverige. Ja. Det gör ont, det är jobbigt, det är utmanande. Men det händer någonting på flera håll.
But it's difficult to know when you are in this if things are getting better or worse.
Both. Det händer samtidigt. Jag träffade Christer Mattsson som jobbar med toleransprojektet. Han har forskat mycket på radikalisering och så träffade jag honom för några år sedan. Och så ställde jag samma fråga till honom. Jag bara, men du som har jobbat mycket med radikalisering av både politiska grupper och religiösa grupper. Så här, är du hoppfull? Blir det bättre? Han bara, både och. Alltså, de progressiva krafterna som inte bara är liksom, det är uppenbarligen nu inte bara på vänster. Nu är det så här, det finns ju progressiva krafter överallt. Nu kanske vänstern har blivit lite mer traditionalister eller vad man ska kalla dem, eller konservativa på ett plan och då så är de progressiva på ett annat plan. Men de progressiva och utvecklande krafterna, när de rör sig snabbt åt ena hållet så finns det en ny konservativ motreaktion mot andra hållet. Och så håller det på så här liksom. Så han menar att det här sker samtidigt. Så att när Sista måltiden startar så triggar det och sätter igång en massa krafter. Både krafter som vill fortsätta bjuda in till det öppna och fria samtalet. Men det kommer också säkert sätta igång krafter som vill begränsa. Och de här behöver varandra. Jag tror inte att det är en dålig sak. För att det är de här krafterna som säger emot det du gör, det du står för, det jag gör, det jag står för. Om man tittar på dem och ser dem egentligen som en möjlighet till att växa, alltså som motstånd när du går på gymmet och lyfter vikter, och man ser dem så här som en anledning till att sträcka på sig ännu mer. Och inte som, de gillar inte oss, istället för att känna sig kränkt eller så här. Okej. Stå kvar, väx, bli starkare. Ju mer de attackerar, ju mer de går på dig, fida på det. Väx liksom av det. Igen, Nassim Taleb, hela anti-fragile-idén går ju ut på att växa av kaos och motstånd. Istället för att lägga sig ner och dö.
Right.
Och jag tänker att din resa är ju ett exempel på det, för mig. Inte bara din egen resa, men också så här, vilka du sen började hänga med och som blev Sista måltiden, att du nu sitter här, att du var med i Janiks podd i samtal. Det är ju, din resa verkar ju inte ha varit från liksom så här, jag hade en stark röst med starka ideal, nu är den svagare, utan tvärtom. Att du har gått från någonting där du inte vågat uttrycka dig till att vikten för dig att uttrycka vad som är värdefullt och viktigt för dig, det blir bara starkare och starkare. Låter det som.
Yeah, I agree, but it has not been easy at all, and at times maybe doubt can creep into you at times, and you're thinking,
absolut,
am I doing right in this, what I'm doing? But I've come to, like, this is the path. kind of this is what I have to do, even though I somewhat have to some extent lost connection with my family and culture and all that. And this is like...
Pratar du med din familj?
Det gör jag, men it has been... I haven't seen them in 10 years now.
Oh shit.
Men
de kan komma hit och hälsa på?
I don't know actually if they would get visa or not. Maybe we will have to like meet in a third country or something like that.
Turkey.
Could be. Could be. So in that sense, and I think also me making a break with religion has alienated me from my past and from my childhood in a way as well. Because it's like, since everything was dominated by religion in this way, your whole view of reality, because it becomes almost like living in a parallel universe. So sometimes when I speak with my parents, for example, and I see how their worldview is very much dominated by religion, I can feel that there is a big gap between us that it can feel a bit bad. It's too alienating. Or that when my mother, for example, asks me to like read Koran or like play Koran at home or things like that, and she's like, or she wants me to pray for my dead grandmother and so on, and it's interesting for me also because I don't want to make her sad, because both my parents seem to have gone into some kind of state of denial about that I had left Islam. So for a while we were not talking about it, and then now it's like basically they are acting as if this is over, and now I'm like, religious again, and I understand that
it's just a phase.
Yes, yeah. And I understand that my mother, especially my mother, wants to have, because I'm the eldest son as well, she wants to have that connection with me, and I can see that it makes her sad that she feels that I'm not really reciprocating when it comes to that religious side.
So this might connect also to what we're talking about, but there's another chapter that you and me, we've been talking about this off cam or off mic, and that's the realm of psychedelics, and not only substances or the like the Swedish policy about narcotics and psychedelics, but also the realm of the mystic, and because the elements of God and the sense of there being something else or something more, like you said, exists there, but without the manuals, without the books, or there are books, but it's not from.
Not the rigidity.
It's not the rigidity. No, right. It's like there are like psychedelic prophets or psychonauts. They don't call themselves prophets. Other people might do, but there's like characters in this game, like Aldous Huxley or Albert Hoffman or Timothy Leary or all these people who share their travel logs.
But do you know this theorized? Some people have this theory that Moses actually had this view, like the whole thing where
the burning bush.
Yes,
yeah, for sure.
Oh,
yeah,
that's a very interesting theory.
But I mean, also, I mean, there's a lot of parts of the scriptures, like the Christian scriptures, that are gone, and those are the mystic parts. But also the parts with the goddesses and the females are just ripped out because it didn't make sense with the narrative that they wanted to impose on people. But for sure, I mean, psychedelics have been part of like the wisdom tradition for thousands of years. If you look at some of the some of the religions, it's more obvious.
There are native religions that are based on psychedelics.
No, I mean like the big ones. Like if you look into Hinduism, I mean, look at the characters; they're trippy as shit. or the like the Nordic mythology. It's the story of how the world came to be in the Nordic mythology. It's like an episode of Rick and Morty. It's like there was a troll who perspirated under his arm, and there were cows in the cosmos, and then there was a tree and a squirrel who ran up the tree, and a guy with one eye and two ravens. It's like I want to try that one.
Yeah.
And in India, it might have been like a certain kind of substance. In Sweden, it was most probably mushrooms.
But mushrooms all over the place, like
all over, and still is.
Yeah. Actually, I think it is the psychedelics, like I said, that started to like make me a bit humble when it comes to my ultra atheism, maybe.
Right. That kind of rigidity is hard to keep.
Yes,
right?
Definitely. After you see what you see.
And when was that? When was your first psychedelic experience?
The first proper one was last year, actually.
And what do you mean when you say proper?
Because I had like in Amsterdam, truffles and stuff, and like it was not that strong. But then my first proper one, it was about 600 micrograms of LSD.
All right, that's a proper one.
Oh.
Don't try that at home.
I can't remember, 600 or 800, something like that. Thanks.
In that state, it's like potato, because there's no you to take offense of how many micrograms over 600 you take. Right?
Could be. Well, I at some point I did like 1,000, and this was another animal. This was something else. I was destroyed. This was some other trip. But the things that I started to feel made me start to, question my certainty that there is nothing apart from what we see. Because this is how I was thinking before. I was like so sure that this is just it, and after we die, it's just a cut to black, and I'm sure that this is the case. Which I don't know how come I was sure about, but yeah. It's actually interesting. I think psychedelics cause an increase on openness characteristic.
You mean on a big 5 level?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it affects that quite a bit. So and I started to have but the thing, it was also interestingly Sam Harris who introduced me to the psychedelics, because I'm really interested in Sam Harris and like the whole spirituality without religion thing, meditation and all that. And I've been reading and trying to research psychedelics, reading books, listening to people and so on. Or experts on the subject for like 3 years before I tried my first proper experience. And I think with psychedelics it's very important to have a context, because, in the 60s and so on, when people were taking it on the street, this is like, I can't even imagine how. You really need to, at least I think, that you have proper context, proper mindset and proper setting for that. Otherwise, you should really have respect for psychedelics in that way.
Sure. I mean, so when we say it's a part of a 1,000-year-old wisdom tradition, it also means you need to know what that wisdom is. And I don't mean wisdom in an uplifted or in like a holy way necessarily, but I mean there are some principles like set and setting. How you feel that morning when you're about to do that kind of journey, or where you are in life with what kind of people, because it's very intimate. If you're with people who do with a sense of like if they are in a bad place, you will feel that like you feel like a heightened level of that sensation. Or if you do it in a setting, like a physical setting, that's hostile, or
with people you don't trust,
people you don't know, like a festival. I mean, a lot of people do it. They go to Coachella and they do like 3 tabs.
Never.
And listen to Lady Gaga, and they freak the fuck out. And then they're like, no, this is not for me. No, you're just being stupid.
Exactly.
And I think the hard part to support people, like in Sweden, is because I wanted to do some kind of, support or like share experience, so people don't hurt themselves. But in Sweden, if you talk about it, it's almost like that's illegal as well. If you
it's a taboo, one of the taboos, I would say.
Oh, it's not only taboo, it's something much more, because it's not only frowned upon to talk about, it's dangerous to talk about.
And there are some dangers with it, like, for example, especially if you have like a history of mental illness.
For sure.
When it comes to schizophrenia and so on. Like Johns Hopkins, they are excluding people who even, I think even if they had 2nd-degree relatives who have a history of schizophrenia, for example, which I think I think, like I said, psychedelics should be treated with respect, and also if I meet people who are like, no, I'm too scared of doing it, I'm like, you should not do it. If you're feeling that way, then this anxiety could actually make you spiral into maybe something during the trip. I mean, and it has been interesting for me to explore the differences between like different psychedelics, like LSD, mushrooms, and DMT, and so on, because even though they are put in the same basket, I tend to have very different experiences.
For sure. I mean, it's also different experiences from time to time with the same substance. Like take a substance like ketamine, for example. You never know where you go. It's like a fortune wheel every time. But what I've learned from it is that that's not different from life. It's actually the same thing. So psychedelics to me is it's like when you enter a dojo, you bow for the wisdom. That's the same thing. Psychedelics is an existential dojo, and I try to bow myself into that, and also when I leave the room, like with a lot of gratitude, and even if I had like I don't believe in bad trips. Of course, there are really tough trips. But again, like I've had really tough adventures in the physical realm as well, and I'm the result of them. I mean, I wouldn't want it any other way. And I learned a lot from them. So yeah, there are really, really hard, tough trips. I've been scared shitless. I thought I was going to die, and something in me probably died. And that was what I was sensing. Something was like, I'm dying. Yeah, you are. And it hurts as fuck.
But it actually can be, like, I remember the first time, speaking about context, if I didn't, because I read and heard a lot about like the dissolution and death of ego and so on, and I didn't really know how it would feel. But then when I started to feel it, I was like, aha, so that's it. And then it was a calm, like I welcomed it. Because to me, actually, I tell people also, because there are people who try to control themselves, to be in control on psychedelics. And I tell them that the only way is to have some semblance of control if you actually let go of control. Because it can be a little bit like surfing waves. If you are there in the ocean, you cannot say, no, I will not be in the ocean anymore. But if you basically learn how to surf, then it can start to have because sometimes for me I'm like, okay, I'm going towards that dark place over there. No, I will surf towards here. This place is nicer, for example. And this is something that I think if I try, no, I will not do it, I'm scared and so on, it would be just like catastrophic, I think, or at least it would be really tough. But I think also it's interesting that my experience with mushrooms, like LSD, to me it's almost always like a show. It has a more of a something like super hippie. It's like an air element, like it's very volatile. So it's like almost you see stars. I've been like to universes where it was like strange creatures speaking strange languages, and I was speaking that language, and
it was actually phlegm.
Could be. But with the mushrooms, it's very much centered around my life. It's very ground. It pulls me down to the ground. This is like what you're supposed to do. This is what your life is about, and this is what you're supposed to focus on. And the thing is, like, it actually makes a lot of sense even afterwards. Like, okay, this is like the path I'm supposed to take. And one thing also that psychedelics has made me realize, again, something that's somewhat humbling, the fragility of culture and how temporary culture is. Like, because when you are in this culture, that the one that you are born and raised in and so on, it's very easy to have a tunnel vision that this is the only way to be. This has always been the way, and this will always be the way, and anything else is madness. But on psychedelics, you get to see, no, actually, our culture right now and our timeline, our place in the timeline, it's just a blip of our history. And if anything, the one real truth in this is change. Anicca. Things will always change and die, and other things will be reborn and so on. Sometimes also it makes me question this extreme individualism that we can have sometimes, because this is very much against our nature. And coming from, again, the opposites of both worlds, the opposite extremes of one another. So a super collectivist society, which has a lot of problems with like oppressing the individual and people intervening in your affairs and so on, forcing you to things that you don't want to do. And then this kind of like super individualistic, even if it's not exactly that, but at least there is some kind of charade that it is so. And it leads to isolation and people not feeling very good. And det är väldigt ohållbart, tycker jag.
Och jag tror ju inte att världens utveckling är linjär.
Nej.
Och det var lite som du beskrev tidigare också, när jag försökte få in min teori om att gamla testamentet kom först i vår uppfostran som mänsklighet, och sen kom nya testamentet. Men när du sa att, men vänta lite, längre bak så fanns det ju en öppenhet för det icke-dualistiska. Det fanns visdom, det fanns saker och ting som var moget. Och därför påminner du mig också om att vi rör oss cykliskt. Och i Sverige så tror jag att vi är någonstans i cykeln där vi med de teknologiska utvecklingarna och med hjälp av vetenskap och rationalism och modernitet har fått väldigt, väldigt mycket. Och samtidigt så har vi också tappat en del. Vi har tappat en del när det kommer till att vara tillsammans, att inte fokusera så mycket på individen, att kanske också vår koppling till det som är bortom det materiella. Och allt det här hänger ihop för mig på något sätt. Liksom, det är den här biten vi fokuserar på i Sverige. Och nu visar jag med händerna så gör jag någon slags här Madonna Vogue-video. Men huvudet. Du är dina tankar, din kunskap och ditt CV i första hand. En individ. Du har egentligen ingen kropp, själ eller tribe. Och om du har en kropp så är den frånkopplad från ditt huvud. Så hela, alltså, there's a lack of wholeness, both as the wholeness of the like the body, soul, mind, but also like the communal or outer collective wholeness, but also like on a cosmic level. You're not put together. You're apart.
Yeah. And also another thing that is interesting that I usually experience, the idea of on psychedelics, the idea sometimes it just strikes me like that it's very strange that me and my friends are not living together. This is like becomes very like why? It's like hold on a second.
Yeah,
it would have been nice if we have this like this where the hippie collectives and so on maybe come from, but it actually suddenly can seem very weird that you're living alone. Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, but this is like how we decided to do it in this point of time in our culture. And you think whether this is a good organization of culture. Jag vet inte.
Nope. Jag säger nej på den. Jag skulle gärna bo på något sätt. Och det finns ju olika former för det. Med mina vänner, att vi köper varsin lägenhet i samma hus, och så kan man liksom ha vissa dörrar emellan, eller så köper man ett stort hus tillsammans och har olika rum. Jag tycker det är ju fantastiskt att vara tillsammans på det sättet, och det är så jag har vuxit upp. Det var alltid så här släktingar som sov över och kompisar som var där, och jag har vuxit upp i storfamilj. Och idag, en av de vanligaste känslorna eller tankarna jag har är just det där, fan det är inte så jävla kul att bo själv på det sättet. Nu har jag liksom nu har jag ju andra konstellationer som jag rör mig i liksom också med så här partner och barn och fram och tillbaka och kompis. Så du vet, allt det där finns ju också. Men jag har tänkt mycket på det där. Jättemycket. Och har också kompisar som bor i entreprenörskollektiv och hippiekollektiv och vuxenkollektiv. Och det finns olika...
Right.
Det behöver inte bara vara alltså, ge inte hippisarna det bara. Så det finns andra sorters kollektiv än bara hippiekollektiv.
Right. Yeah, and I think the thing is the whole thing with psychedelics has really gotten a bad press. I remember recently there was a researcher was talking about mushrooms as treatment for depression and so on, and it was on BBC, so that was super interesting for me because psychedelics are getting more and more normalized in the US, for example. And the reporter like asked him a question, but you know, we should be careful with these substances and so on. And he was like, he went bonkers on her. He was like, no, this is one of the safest things to consume. Native cultures have been like consuming it for thousands of years. And the whole thing of the anti-psychedelic movement is actually was political during the Vietnam War, that they started to clamp down on LSD and so on because it was getting in the way of sending young men to Vietnam.
Yeah, actually, they first of all, they thought it was supposed to be some kind of secret weapon, and they tried it out, but no one wanted to go to war because it's psychedelics. I mean, if everything is one, I wouldn't want to hurt myself, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, like if like the Swiss would be on LSD, and the Germans would be on amphetamine.
And they were.
Yeah, exactly.
They were. I mean
totally two different kinds of reactions.
The Nazis without amphetamine, I mean, they wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things they did.
Yeah, probably not.
I think Anders Breivik was maybe on amphetamine as well. Maybe I read it somewhere. I'm not sure.
That's possible. And then they started because of this as well to being linked more and more to things that are not really scientific or like I try as much as possible not to make any truth claims out of my experiences. So I never say, well, I'm sure these things are out there or whatever, even though I've seen like really weird shit and they felt super real. Like I've been sometimes on trips where it really feels like a simulation. I could be like looking in the mirror and the surroundings keep shifting. It's almost like somebody has like remote control and like, and it's super interesting. But I think this time around it has to be because I think it's psychedelics are very culturally potent, and they can, if not regulated properly and with enough context and guidance, really threaten the fabric of the culture in a way that can be destructive.
Of course.
And I think this time around, it really has to be done right, so not to have like a backfire like the 60s.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not a coincidence it was fueling the counterculture movement.
No?
That's not a coincidence. That was like the seed of it. So, and I agree with you. I do think it's wise to talk about and also reflect on how we do it this time around.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't even talk about legalizing. I don't, because I don't think that's the way to go. I mean, that would be awesome, but to be able to do that, I think we need to do it properly, and that's just to focus on the science. Like, first of all, the science, but also the decriminalizing of it. Like taking care of people who are being treated like really badly right now in Sweden because they're addicts or they're not feeling well existentially or psychologically. Maybe just start to take care of those people by decriminalizing their desperate ways of trying to heal themselves.
Yeah.
So maybe start there and with the science and just do it slowly.
Yeah, but also I never put psychedelics and other drugs in the same because...
But other people do.
Yeah, I know. And that's a mistake.
I know.
I think,
because narcotics means sedatives.
Yes.
And psychedelics is like the opposite of sedatives.
And it's like, for example, it's just a mushroom.
It's not... Yeah.
It's not like really... but... Yeah, I wonder, like, I would be in favor of legalizing them, but regulating them. So I would like actually to see something similar to psychedelic centers, for example, where this is the place that you can go and have a psychedelic trip.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying as well. But I don't think that's not going into legalization. That's going into decriminalization and like leaving it to the professionals to invite people to those sessions, like not putting it out there in shops, like head shops as in Amsterdam, but with professionals and psychologists and people who are who have the wisdom and the tools to guide you. I mean, that would be a nice first step, I think.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it would be awesome to have like a Systembolaget for it in the future. To regulate it and to inform people on how to use it.
Yeah, and like with proper sitters and so on. Yeah. My worry sometimes with the decriminalization without legalization thing is that maybe it will escalate criminality, you see?
Right.
Because decriminalization will increase demand a little bit.
Yes.
And since it's still illegal to sell it and so on, that would very much play into the hands of criminals.
That's valid.
So I would rather see legalization with regulation rather than just decriminalization while it's still being illegal to sell it and so on. We shall see how it will. But I have a feeling that Sweden would be the last country to go that way. They have a very puritanical drug policy, and even culturally, I would say.
But when we turn really hard.
Well, that's possible.
We go all in. We're gonna be the best psychedelic producers in the world, like rättvisemärkt ekologisk psykedelika från Österlen.
It could be. I think we just need to tap into the consensus culture around psychedelics.
Yes.
And then everybody who's not part of that will be frowned upon.
Everyone's waiting for the first platoon to go. I mean, and when it turns. It's typical Swedish.
Yeah.
Okej, så Anders Breivik var påverkad av efedrin och anabola.
Oj. Okay.
Och det var därför han hade musik också, för att han visste att om han inte var påverkad av efedrin och anabola och inte hade musik för att störa ut sina tankar, så skulle han inte klara av att skjuta folk.
Shit.
Shit.
He should have taken LSD instead.
That would be a different story.
Yeah, that would be a different story.
Så vi har ju fått en massa frågor till dig, Omar, också. Jag tror vi har gjort 2 timmar nu. 2:11. Vad sägs om att vi går över till Patreon och svarar på lite lyssnarfrågor?
Let's do it.
Så tack till dig som har lyssnat och tittat så här långt. Och vi avslutar alltid med att säga att samtalet fortsätter, för att det här är varken början eller slutet. Förhoppningsvis ett slags mellansamtal som kan klatscha in i ett samtal som du har med dina kompisar om religion, tro, psykedelika, yttrandefrihet. Så låt samtalet fortsätta, ställ fler frågor, utmana varandra på ett respektfullt sätt